I have spent the past 3 days ranking every Pixar movie from worst to best to the end of 2023.
At the number 27 spot,
We have the single worst Pixar and quite possibly Disney movie ever made. I bet you can guess, can't you? That's right, Turning Red. It was the most cringy movie I've ever seen from start to finish, and the story wasn't relatable or believable in any way. And another thing, John Ratzenberger wasn't in it. I really enjoy John Ratzenberger. More on that later. I don't know anyone with good sense in movies who liked it. And this one member of the boy band, I'm pretty sure that eyebrow was stolen from Jay from Ninjago. The stupid animation style, the lack of well-known actors, the fact that it was actually rated undeservedly high. I could go on and on and on about this movie, but no. Elemental was boring, okay? That's pretty much all I have to say about it. I just really don't like romance movies. I did like the world it was set in, though. So that's it. Number 35 is The Good Dinosaur. I'm not saying it was necessarily a bad story without character development and all that. It just wasn't really that interesting a movie from the beginning and didn't make much money at all, making it Pixar's very first flop. A Bug's Life was okay, but probably my favorite thing about it was John Ratzenberger's big role as P.T. Flea, the greedy circus director. One thing I did like about it was the whole loser exiled from his homeland and must redeem himself. That storyline never gets old, especially because it isn't even used that often. Brave had its funny moments, mostly from King Fergus, but it was also a really weird movie. The overall storyline is actually a bit similar to Turning Red. A girl with red hair begins falling out of favor with her family, and she does everything she can to turn it around, and her mom eventually lets her do what she wanted from the beginning. She's probably the second best Disney princess aside from Rapunzel, despite being the only one made by Pixar. Monsters, Inc. wasn't that great a story to me, but it was set in a pretty clever world where monsters have to scare kids to convert their screams into energy, and starred John Goodman and Billy Crystal. Like all Pixar movies except Turning Red, it was pretty funny, and again, John Ratzenberger having such a big role as the Abominable Snowman made this movie better than the previous three. And the Abominable Snowman delivered what may be the greatest Pixar line ever.
Welcome to the Himalayas!
The Incredibles is number 30. It was, without a doubt, the generic superhero movie. I'm not really sure what else to say about it, honestly, besides that Samuel L. Jackson plays Frozone, which was cool, and the great villain backstory and motivation. It's just a very okay movie, nothing great, nothing terrible about it. I think we can all agree that Toy Story 4 is probably the worst Toy Story movie, which isn't to say it was a bad movie, but it was kind of unnecessary since Toy Story 3 wrapped up the story so well. Toy Story 4's main purpose was to make money fast, which it succeeded in doing. Also, some of the actors that I really liked from the original movie, like Don Rickles and Estelle Harris, had died, which essentially meant that they needed to assemble a new cast of characters. This should have been a hint to Pixar that Toy Story 4 wasn't meant to be. The movie also betrayed Woody's main character motivation, which is to always be there for a kid. And he did that right up until the very end, where he just ups and leaves just to stay with Bo Peep, when he should have convinced her and her gang to come with him. But as you surely know by now, I have a soft spot for actors, and it was really cool seeing Keanu Reeves and Key and Peele. Finding Nemo is... how should I say this? I've never really known what to think about it. It's another very, very average movie that was funny, but wasn't as entertaining as something like Toy Story. There was one thing I liked about it, however, and it was that they named Nemo after the captain of the Abraham Lincoln in Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. The movie just had average jokes, an average villain, an average protagonist, an average supporting cast, and it was just so overwhelmingly mediocre that I have no idea what to think about it. So I'm just gonna leave Finding Nemo a mystery and move on. Next up is WALL-E. I always liked post-apocalyptic movies, but WALL-E was made as a funny version of this genre, which made it even better. I also like sci-fi, so the giant spaceship was cool too, and again, John Ratzenberger.
Look at that! What? Hey, I know that guy. It's, Wally.
Luca is another very okay Pixar movie. It was kind of cool how it was set in Italy, and the villain was good in that he just wants power in the community and will do anything to get it. Ercole Visconti was more than a typical bully, as he was trying to get what he wanted through winning the Portorosso Cup rather than intimidation by being the biggest and toughest guy around. But this is the first Pixar movie John Ratzenberger wasn't in, so it's not as good as the rest. Coco is weird. Now that I think about it, a lot of Pixar movies are weird, but this one especially. The design team certainly had their hands full with all the colors in these spirit animals, and the music in it was also really good. The story was good, and I always like movies with inspirations from real-world cultures, so the whole Day of the Dead thing was good. Beyond that, there's nothing else to really say about Coco, so I'm just gonna leave it at that. Toy Story is the reason Pixar is a thing. It was a brilliant Kickstarter for a studio that would eventually become one of the greatest movie studios on Earth. Plus, it has Tom Hanks, Tim Allen, and a bunch of other great cast members, and the character development was out of this world. Woody eventually figured out that he and Buzz could share leadership of Andy's room. Buzz realized he wasn't a real space ranger. Sid found out toys are sentient beings, and
Don't like being blown up, Sid. Or smashed, or ripped apart.
and everyone else realized that they had been wrong about Woody trying to kill Buzz. It was also the first full-length 3D animated movie, so it actually changed the movie industry forever and gave rise to other popular 3D animation like VeggieTales. Unless Disney ever goes back to 2D, which some people are saying they should. Some of you are going to be upset about this, but I liked Lightyear. It had a lot of action, which is unusual for a Pixar movie. It also had Chris Evans, which I know some people are mad about, and so was I at first, but it turns out the reason Pixar decided not to use Tim Allen for this was because the Buzz in Toy Story was a dumber, clumsier version of Buzz, while the Buzz in Lightyear is the action hero. The only reason I don't rank it higher on this list is because of the unfortunate LGBTQ message, and no, just because I don't believe in it doesn't mean I hate everyone who does.
Up has one of the shortest names in all of movies, being composed of only 2 letters. It was a great movie and had one of my favorite movie characters ever, Doug the dog. It was a great movie with character development, and more funny characters than usual, and a pretty unconventional protagonist that I really enjoyed. I mean, what kids movie studio actually uses a 78-year-old man as their main character? It was just a really interesting movie with the usual Pixar jokes and charm. Finding Dory was actually better than Finding Nemo because I like Dory as a character, and the movie was a good example of what can happen when you make the funny sidekick the main character. This was also the way it worked with Cars 2 and Monsters University. Finding Dory was everything Up was and more, with great characters and wit. Beyond that, there's nothing much else to say about it, so moving on. Inside Out has to be one of the most creative movie ideas I've ever seen. I mean, emotions being physical beings living inside your head? I am still baffled as to how they came up with this. And then there was Lewis Black, who played anger, and how all the emotions were just raw manifestations of that emotion led to just complete and total hilarity. Fear and anger are the perfect matchup for comedy, and joy and sadness are almost as good. And yes, I know there is an Inside Out 2 coming out, but I have to admit it worries me. Pixar has been on a downhill path lately, and I'm not sure Inside Out 2 won't just be turning red again. I love food, and Ratatouille is all about food. It was a really funny movie on its own, but again, it was a really creative idea. A rat, separated from his family, loves food and is a chef in his own right, but the only problem standing in the way is that he's a rat. Then he discovers a guy who doesn't know how to cook, but does know how to appear human. And John Ratzenberger was in this movie a lot more as Mustafa the waiter, so yeah. Some of you are going to be upset about this, but I liked Incredibles 2. It had a great villain, and it was, I think, better than the first one. It was cool to see hypnosis of superheroes, and Mr. Incredible having a hard time being a dad, because it showed us this side of him we had never seen before. Although, it didn't have great character development, which is the only thing holding it back. I hold the Cars franchise in extremely high esteem, it being my life from age 2 up to 8. Well, I mean, that and Mario Kart Wii. Cars 3 is definitely tied with the original Cars for best Cars movie, but I put the original higher on this list because I didn't have Cars 3 when I was 4. But the movie itself was a good movie and had lots of relation to the original. It was a great movie that had way more of John Ratzenberger than we were expecting, which was awesome. Cars 3 is one of those movies that makes me think that John Ratzenberger might be in more Pixar sequels. It didn't have quite as much Mater though, which is another reason I marked it down. But Cars 3 was good because it was a story about how Lightning might lose his career, and I'm no expert on sports movies or anything, but it was a pretty good storyline for that kind of thing. Soul was an incredibly deep movie. It was a great example of unusual character development, as the character development was, instead of being where the characters are selfish or egotistical at the beginning, it's where Joe thinks that he can't be happy without playing music for his job. But then he dies and goes through this whole adventure in the before life to realize that he doesn't need that to be happy, he just needs to live his life. And the fact that he doesn't get what he wants at the end, but still learns a lesson was great, because I always love stories like that. All in all, Joe is just a great character that I never would have come up with, and is one of my favorite Pixar heroes. And now we have the original Cars. As I said, I grew up with this movie, so it remains one of my favorite Pixar movies. It is a funny, memorable villain played by Michael Keaton, and had a just as memorable supporting cast, with each one of the Radiator Springs cars being funny in their own way. The story was good as always, the jokes were good as always, and it had that Cars charm where it always has an unconventional storyline, but is still really, really good. Toy Story 3 is a great movie. I love Prison Break movies, and this one was one of the best ones I've ever seen. Plus, it introduced Barbie and Ken, which were both fantastic additions to the movie, and there was the fact that Toy Story 3 might be the greatest ending to a series ever. Unfortunately, Pixar decided that wasn't the end and made Toy Story 4, but that's not important right now. If Pixar hadn't made Toy Story 4, it would have been a great series ending. Anyway, moving on. Every single one of you is probably going to unsubscribe after this, but I love Cars 2. I think it is better than its successor and its predecessor, and I also think Mater makes a better protagonist than Lightning ever did, and I really like action movies. The secondary villain, Professor Z, was, I think, better than Miles Axelrod, and I kind of wish they had made him the main antagonist. And it was also interesting because it's like a story about Lightning from Mater's point of view. I've never seen another movie that worked like that, and I really liked it. I just can't understand why so many people don't like this movie. It is so fun. The main reason I like Onward is because from the point of view of someone who plays Dungeons & Dragons, you can see how much it was inspired by it. I don't want to get too in detail here for people who don't play D&D, but the Manticore coming out is a pretty normal way to introduce a non-player character, and the part where they use shields to avoid the arrows felt a lot like when the players managed to skip the Dungeon Master's masterfully made puzzle by being really creative in a way the DM didn't expect. But the movie itself was just a really good movie with everything Pixar normally offers, along with Dungeons & Dragons inside jokes. Toy Story 2 is my favorite installment of the franchise, and it, again, had way better character development than most other movies, and it sets up Toy Story 3 perfectly, with the prospector telling Woody that if he goes back to Andy, Andy will eventually get rid of him when he grows up. At first he agrees with him, but Buzz convinces him to come back. It is amazing that they're able to keep coming up with character development for Woody after so many movies. Alright, I'm gonna get backlash for this, but my all-time favorite Pixar movie is Monsters University. It is hilarious and has more character development, and this great little jingle here that is just... Randall and Sully's backstory of why they hate each other was great, and it's just such an amazing story. Anyway, that's it. I bet you're glad I'm not one of those phony baloney bloater-eyed YouTubers that just goes on and on with pointless stuff at the end. I mean, I've never done that, never will do it, and why would I ever do it, and